This is good afternoon on the West Coast of the U.S. and the East Coast of the U.S. I am Monica A. Coleman, and this is
Tananarive Due. I was just seeing all the names of the people who are here. Yes, I was being nosy. Good to see everybody. Thank you for coming.
And this is Octavia Tried to Tell Us.
Parable for today's pandemic, which who knew, Monica, when we started this?
We would
dangerously close to a year ago, but not quite. Yeah, that we would still be talking about the pandemic. Everybody, thank you for being here. We are very excited to share this time with you. As always, we are living in interesting times, and we find inspiration in the work of and legacy of Octavia E. Butler, as she had her eye firmly on these approaching storm clouds, and nothing happening today would surprise her at all. Maybe some of the details, but certainly not the human nature part. So yeah, we are celebrating her. Thank you. We're so grateful that we had her for as long as we did. And we have a special guest today too.
So we're excited about this because we get to have really great conversations about Afrofuturism and parable, earthseed, change, and sourcing it for how we can figure out creativity and life.
Well put, my dear. Well put. So 80 plus people in the house. That's exciting.
So Octavia tried to tell us. Tell y'all, I'm going to get this down. Boom.
There you go. We learned last week that our thumbnails were blocking our reading. So we fixed it now. Yeah. It's all about evolving. Adapt or die, Octavia said.
adapt. So we'll begin with some introductions, then we'll have our conversation. Some people had to use the opportunity to submit questions ahead of time, which we will try to get to. We'll also have a flow of conversations, and we'll try to take some from the chat too, if we can. You can find us online using the hashtag #OctaviaTried. It's really fun on Twitter. There's usually a great parallel conversation happening.
Yes, if you hear something you like, dip on over to Twitter and just hashtag it and let people know that we're on.
I am happy to introduce my colleague and my friend, Tananarive Due. She is an award-winning author who teaches Black horror and Afrofuturism at UCLA. She's an executive producer on Shudder's groundbreaking documentary, Horror Noir, A History of Black Horror. A leading voice in Black speculative fiction for more than 20 years, Due has won an American Book Award, an NAACP Image Award, and a British Fantasy Award, and her writing has been included in Best of the Year anthologies. Her books include Ghost Summer Stories, My Soul to Keep, and The Good House. She and her late mother, civil rights activist Patricia Stephens Due, co-authored Freedom in the Family, a mother-daughter memoir of the fight for civil rights. She is married to author Stephen Barnes, with whom she collaborates on screenplays. They live with their son, Jason, and 2 cats.
That's great. I still have my 2 cats in my bio. Wow. Okay. Monica A. Coleman, Reverend Dr. Monica A. Coleman, I just like to call you that, is professor of Africana Studies at the University of Delaware. She's also an ordained elder in the African Methodist Episcopal Church, an initiate of traditional Yoruba religion. She works at the intersection of faith, culture, and social justice. She's the author or editor of 6 books and several articles on book chapters that focus on the role of faith in addressing critical social and philosophical issues. Her book, Making a Way Out of No Way, A Womanist Theology, is required reading at colleges and universities around the country. Her memoir, Bipolar Faith, A Black Woman's Journey with Faith and Depression, received the Silver Illumination Award in 2017. Dr. Coleman speaks widely on religious pluralism, religion and mental health, sexual and domestic violence, and navigating change. She lives in a lively intergenerational household where she is an avid vegan cook and cyclist. And we are very, very, very excited today. We have amazing guests, of course, every month, but Sheree Renée Thomas, I'm very, very excited. She is here. She's an award-winning fiction writer, poet, and editor. Her work is inspired by myth and folklore, natural science, and Mississippi Delta conjure. 9 Bar Blue, Stories from an Ancient Future is her first all-prose collection. Won't be her last. She is also the author of 2 multi-genre hybrid collections, Sleeping Under the Tree of Life, long listed for the 2016 Otherwise Award and honored with the Publishers Weekly Starred Review, and Shotgun Lullabies. She edited the World Fantasy Award winning groundbreaking speculative fiction anthologies Dark Matter in 2000 and 2004. And when I say groundbreaking, I mean literally the first of its type when Dark Matter was published in 2000. Groundbreaking. And it's the first to introduce W.E.B. Du Bois' science fiction short stories. Holy cow. Her work is widely anthologized and appears in the Big Book of Modern Fantasy, edited by Anne and Jeff Vandermeer. She is the associate editor of the historic Black Arts literary journal, Obsidian, Literature and the Arts of the African Diaspora, founded in 1975, and is the editor of the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, founded in 1949. She also writes book reviews for Asimov's. She was recently honored as a 2020 World Fantasy Award finalist in the Special Award Professional category for contributions to the genre, and is the co-host of the 2021 Hugo Awards ceremony. Is at DisCon in Washington, D.C. with Malka Older. Sheree is the guest of honor of WisCon 45 and a special guest of Buscone 58, sorry. She's a Marvel writer. Hi. We're both in that anthology and contributed to the groundbreaking anthology Black Panther, Tales of Wakanda, edited by Jesse J. Holland. She lives in her hometown, Memphis, Tennessee, near a mighty river and a pyramid. So welcome, Sheree Renée Thomas, who also, by the way, studied under Octavia Butler at the Clarion Science Fiction Writers Workshop. So
hey,
there she is, almost. Hey.
Hello. Hi, everyone.
Look at that beautiful necklace you're wearing.
Thank you. Sweet.
It says, I live between the river and the pyramid.
Yeah. Well, that is our skyline. Yeah.
Oh, the pyramid. Okay. Wonderful.
Thank you all for having me. Yeah.
It's hard to even know where to begin, Sheree. I guess when I think about Dark Matter back in 2000, this was shortly after I first met Octavia Butler in 1997. And you had been her student, and you may be able to tell the story better than I can. But you put this anthology together as a very young baby editor / writer and created something that was so groundbreaking and an important step in really cementing the Black speculative arts, what many people call Afrofuturism, even though we weren't calling it that back then. So I guess my first question is just sort of a general question. When you compare then and now, when you were editing Dark Matter, and now we live in this flourishing renaissance. I mean, I don't think Octavia would have even imagined it, as recently as shortly before she passed away. Mm-hmm. So could you just sort of talk about how you feel about where we are now and the speculative arts and how it feels?
It's an amazing experience. I mean, it is in many ways, it's a whole new world. From what you know that from publishing at that time period. I remember my mentor, Cheryl Woodruff, when I was editing at Random House, handed me your book.
Wow.
Said, you like that scary stuff, Sheree? You will love this. And I did, because it was scary, it was Black, and it was Southern. So I was like, wow, and it was wonderful. And it just, started my my fandom of you very early. But it wasn't a sense that we even existed in the field. And even though Alondra Nelson, I was active with Alondra Nelson, and congratulations to her now joining the presidential science team.
Yes.
An Afrofuturist in the White House.
Yes.
Yes.
It's so exciting.
So that's not something we would have, conceived of at the time when she was doing the Afrofuturism.net listserv with Paul D. Miller, DJ Spooky, Kylie Towell, and Rocky Moore, and all these other wonderful, amazing people, Floyd Webb, everyone, Bruce Erling, just all these great people were a part of that conversation. And there wasn't that sense of a community. We were spread out around the world, and we were being told that we didn't exist in this genre. So I was sitting in a major Big Five publisher, and I didn't feel comfortable pitching that book to where I worked at the time. So that should give you another sense of that. And this, of course, was before social media. So you already know there wasn't like a posse of people that would have echo and have your back about anything. You were on your own. So it was hard in a lot of ways. And I think, I don't want to be a Pollyanna about it. There are a lot of conversations that we're having then that like Aja Marie Brown was having, before that, and Toni Morrison as well, when they were, editors. That continues to be an issue, but we are in a amazing space. There are so many good, wonderful, amazing Afrofuturist works and African futurism works and Black speculative arts and any name you want to give it, that's being published in the major publishing companies here and abroad and by independent small presses, which have always, I feel, have been a lifeblood for this Black speculative art anyway. It just wasn't on the larger radar, for people who are reviewing or what have you. But it's just a place where I say now we actually need a library. We need a collection that is, named after our pioneers, that has every single copy of this work available. Because I think it's amazing. I went to the Center for Afrofuturism Studies in Iowa.
Iowa?
Yes, it's in Iowa. We're near with people from the Iowa Writers Workshop. Anne Dupla is one of the major people there, and I got a chance to see the university's archive special collection that they have. That's all science fiction and fantasy. And I met with the archivist there and walked through the aisles, and they don't really have their huge place, but they don't even have the physical space for all of that work. But I was looking at it and thinking, we literally could have a collection of the work that's being published and all the paraliterature, the comic books and the graphic novels and the films, and TV work that, Tananarive and Stephen Barnes are doing and all the other great people. So this is a dream come true, to be honest. It is a dream that we are living in. It's a dream that still has nightmarish moments.
Yes.
That we have to make right, but that's the part of living. That's the work that we're doing. This is the time. I say we're like that moment in Game of Thrones. Hold the door. Hold the door. But this is like hold the door open.
Right.
Instead of it being closed, because and you can ask any of our great writers who were publishing very well in the 90s, that sometimes this is a pendulum that swings back and forth.
Girl, who are you telling? Listen, we thought in the 90s, we thought it was just going to be the way it was, right?
Yeah,
like we were all going to be like up and away. We didn't know that the tide would then also recede.
But it's back. We were in a brave new world in the 90s, right?
It's
all
back
these movies
now.
were being made, television, all this Black TV and movies, and also these great writers who were having books coming out in hardcover and being promoted and
paperback and getting toured.
And
your piece on the book.
Terry McMillan for that. Thank you, Terry
McMillan.
Terry McMillan for that, because before they didn't think we existed in science fiction genre. They didn't think we read books at all.
That's true.
And that's a literal thing. I mean, I'm not even exaggerating.
No, you are absolutely right about that. It was a revelation.
They also thought that the work we did, it all had to be social protest. So that was even the battle before that. That's why Terry McMillan was so significant, because she showed that everything didn't have to be the wonderful Color Purple or, Song of Solomon. There are other stories that we want to tell as well.
Yes.
And the 90s seemed like that space, right? And that's when I entered publishing, and learning at the first Black imprint at a major 5, because of course Third Man Books existed, but at a major 5, it was One World Books, with Cheryl Woodruff. And and then that, as you said, that wave went away.
It sure did.
So all I can say, if you're creating work, and get in while you fit in, as we say. because unfortunately our movements it isn't attached to us, because we're always doing the work and creating and imagining and being ahead of the curve, actually, being ahead of society in a lot of ways, because we're writing, as marginalized people writing from the margins. So we see the big picture, we see the long vision, we are the long distance runners, but the industry hasn't yet seen us as part of the mainstream. They like to take certain things and mainstream it, right, and disconnect it from its origins, but they don't necessarily see us as being part of anything, the regular normal things. We're always still kind of a novelty, so it's not like we should be writing diet books and dog books and garden books and critically acclaimed, but not selling very well, but critically acclaimed literary works, and also the blockbuster romances and young adult literature that's paying for everything that gets published in publishing. Everyone knows that romances pay for everything in publishing. I mean, poetry. I mean, I watched it and saw it, and that's a fact, because the audience is from 8 to 80, and it's across all backgrounds of socioeconomic things. So that's what pays for everything else. And
by the way, I have to mention that our girl Stacey Adams is also a romance writer. Hello.
So while she's in the world, there's space for love. That we have love in it, right? She's doing that wonderfully. So it's when we're not treated as a trend, like, oh, they're burning things in Minneapolis, so now we should have anti-racism books, and all the anti-racism work shoots up to the top of the New York Times best-selling list. We should be a part of the conversation all the time. And that's the world that I'm looking for, where we can just be as mediocre as anybody else that's being published, and as brilliant as anyone else, and all the spaces in between, right? So, and for other communities as well, because humans are storytellers, and all of these stories are universal.
And that is happening, I think, that other marginalized writers are being uplifted also in this wave.
We need those stories. So that would be great to see, but we have seen it before. So we're hopeful, and we're going to create as much work as we can and connect with as many people as possible to get that good work going through. Yeah, but that's the difference. And also, it's not just literature that we're talking about. It's all these other genres of art as well. And it's not just abstract conversations about Afrofuturism, but a lot of it is being used as social case studies to do actual real-time, social work and change. And that's a powerful, wonderful thing to see, that wasn't as prevalent and visible in the when Mark Derry coined the term in the 90s, and when Alondra Nelson, gave it life and spirit and community. So that's happening in a wonderful way. I feel like Stacey Adams is a old school Afrofuturist, and that because she saw what needed to be done, imagine a way forward, and her and the other community activists worked a decade to make it so. So yeah.
You mentioned and that this is something that has been going on for a long time, whether publishing acknowledges it or not. And I would love to hear you talk a bit about Du Bois as a speculative fiction writer, because people know him more, right, for that protest genre you were talking about. So I'd love for you to talk about, kind of Du Bois' stories, how you included that, and some of that grounding work, right, that African American writers have done in Afrofuturism.
Thank you for asking about that. I had a friend, a great mentor of mine, and she mentioned to me, she said, Sheree, you did something that people rarely do. You had a great discovery, and it changed a whole canon. And people would be walking around with PhDs and everything else based off that. And I said, well, I know, because I have been on some of those committees, and I have written recommendations for some of those scholars. So I know that. When I went to my bookshelf in my home and pulled off his very thin volume that included not only his romances that he'd written, but prayers that he'd written, just all of the other work that wasn't the Souls of Black folk, right? All the other writing that he had been doing, well, not all of it, but a lot of it was in this one thin volume. And I looked through it, and I said, the comet is classic traditional golden age science fiction. You know, a comet comes to the earth, and the other stories would have been an asteroid or the moon or what have you, comes to the earth, creates this apocalyptic setting where it looks like mankind has been wiped off the face of the earth. A young brother thinks he's the only one that has survived this horrible disaster, and discovers there's another human alive, and it happens to be a white woman, and they're nervous about each other because of the time period that he's writing this. The country is severely segregated, right? But they need to collaborate, as Octavia would say. They needed to work together. They need to adapt, right? And so they began to contemplate that they need to work together to survive. And just when they were getting comfortable with that, they hear the other voices of white men, and then they're kind of pulled back into that old rigid setting. It's a traditional science fiction story, and I was surprised that it hadn't been discussed as such. So I'm doing this research to make I'm surely someone has, and it hadn't been, because science fiction is often dismissed as not literature, right? Even though they cherry pick the works from science fiction that they want to, confer the capital L literature label to it. But it was part of his body of work. And then I found Jesus Christ in Texas as well.
I have not read that one. See, the comet, it's so interesting because the comet is something I teach in my Afrofuturism class at UCLA and my Black horror class, because I look at it as a precursor to Get Out. I'm not saying that Jordan Peele had read it. I don't believe he had. But the dynamic, that third rail in American history of the Black man and the white woman, and all of the racial violence that has amassed around that fear of Black male sexuality, in particular, wanting to own Black women for themselves, not wanting white women to be with Black men, all that is rolled up in the comet, and Du Bois, as an anti-lynching advocate, surely knew this, because the first thing someone says when they put the word lynch does get mentioned as soon as someone lays eyes on them together.
Immediately.
It makes me think, about this, all the attention for Afrofuturism now, even with Du Bois writing Afrofuturism, that, Afrofuturism is a really important way to talk about injustice and violence. And I'd love to hear you reflect a bit on that. I mean, this is why we're going to Parable, but perhaps it's always been a way, not clearly the only, but a really important way. You could even argue maybe necessary way that we talk about how we deal with violence and injustice.
I think it's necessary because to write it and to create it and capture what's happening in the real time that you're in, whether you're writing in 1857 or 1899 or 1903, like Martin Delany and Sutton E. Griggs, who was a Baptist preacher, and Martin Delany is considered the father of Black nationalism, among all the other firsts that he achieved, and Pauline E. Hopkins, who was a contemporary and friend of both Booker T. Washington and W.E.B. Du Bois when she was writing her work as well, and knew them both, and was kind of like trying to mediate their disagreements as well while she was writing her science fiction or proto science fiction works. You capture it as Black horror in that moment, right? But when you conceive of a way out of it, because that is what the work was in the 1850s and the 1890s, they were imagining Black freedom and liberation, and the form that was best used for that, a tool that was more useful and relevant is the one where you can imagine outside of what is, right? And so they had to use a kind of speculative framework to get the ending that they want, because in the world that they lived in, that ending didn't exist, right? We hear about slave uprisings that are unsuccessful, not the ones that were successful. So for you to create a novel that's all about a Black man creating this alternate Black state, in the United States, that comes out of his love for his wife, who had been sold away, and he's going to find his wife. In his journey to find his wife, he, builds allies and creates this whole new alternate world. That is science fiction, an alternate history already. But it comes out of Black horror. It comes out the horror of the Black family being divided, us being the basis of America's earliest capitalism, and the origins of our wealth, and that injustice, they were very conscious of it, whether it was in the 1850s or whether it was 1890s, 1900s, when W. Du Bois was publishing, right on it, that state had not changed. And so there is a through line, at least for speculative fiction, some of the speculative fiction that's written in America in English here, that connects to that long journey for liberation, right up until today. In other parts of the world, they have other histories and stories that they need to tell and they want to tell. And horror is a part of that, because our experience, unfortunately, has been laced with that, horror. Yeah.
It is the natural, genre to express our experience on these shores, certainly, and in many places around the world. Listen, I want to take us back to the origins of this webinar, which was the appreciation for Octavia and her visionary ability to see the big picture, as you said, from the margins, and basically tell us who we are in many different forms and many different timelines, whether it was the future with aliens and Dawn, or whether it's Kindred. Like, who are we, and how do we behave? Tell us about how you met Octavia, what it was like to be taught by her, and how you approached her for Dark Matter.
Wow. So I first met Octavia Butler, thank goodness, because of independent Black bookstores. I went to a bookstore that unfortunately no longer exists now, that was in Harlem. And there was they had a reading. She came to New York to do, her readings. And we packed up in that bookstore. We're standing room only in there. And she read and she answered our questions. She was wonderful. And I hung around afterwards. And I talked with her and told her how much I loved her work. I've been introduced to her writing from a Black professor, Black scholar in college. I was at Rhodes, and I had refused to major in English. I didn't want to major in English because when I looked at the syllabi, it was the same old people. And I was like, I want to read new stories, new things. So I became a history major instead. But I ended up taking a slavery and literature course because it was just intriguing. I was like, slavery and literature, let me see what that is. And it was by, I think, our Milton scholar, this Black scholar. She was a Milton scholar, and it was like the one class that she taught that was kind of outside of her normal area. And in there, we studied Kindred. And that was the first time I read it. Mind you, I'd been reading science fiction as a child. I got disenchanted as a teenager, started really focusing only on Black women writers because I really needed to see our stories on the page. And so when I realized that Octavia Butler had been publishing science fiction, at that time I didn't even know that Samuel Delany was Black. I knew he was gay, but I didn't know he was Black because the copies I had didn't have his amazingly fine, handsome picture on it at the time.
I know, right? I've seen those pictures.
Like, Chip, you were something. But that book, we had such a spirited conversation in class, big debate about the power of history. Mind you, this is the early 90s, right? So late 80s, early 90s. So we were still kind of talking about, Fear of a Black Planet, Public Enemy, and walking around with, Africa medallions and, and kente cloth and kofis and everything else, right? And so we all assumed that if we were pulled back, like Dana, into our ancestral past, into the plantation or the small farm or wherever where we were enslaved, that we would be, race people and Harriet Tubmans and sitting them on to the future. And when she got that first whip back, she got an order. She began to realize there's a little bit more than just my will here. I've got to figure this thing out. And that conversation was really powerful. But this scholar had paired it with Shirley Ann Williams' Dessa Rose, and with Jubilee, so reading those works along with the satirical novel Middle Passage by Charles Johnson, we had and we also watched Mandingo. It wasn't until I was working at Random House that I realized that was a national best-selling book because they still had the paperbacks. in the archives. You could go back there and get anything you wanted. In the history of the publishing house, and there Mandingo was, and I was like, "Are you kidding me?" That was book is different from the movie, but yes. So we studied all of that and had those conversations, and it really shaped me in terms of what I wanted to do and what I thought I could do. So by the time I got to New York, I was ready to rock and roll. So meeting Octavia for the first time, I got to be a fangirl, but also connect with her. And so we were able to meet again, is when I finally pitched the book that would become Dark Matter to her, And she told me that she had wanted to do a similar anthology in the 70s. And she was going to try to do it with the editor, Martin Greenberg. And they were told that no one would read a book like that because it would be all about race. Yeah. So she was very happy to support Dark Matter because it was a time that it could be published when it wasn't the time when she wanted to do something like that.
And when it came out, it caused quite a splash. And as a matter of fact, there was early film interest in it, as you know. And that's one of the things. Steve and I had an interview with Octavia in the year 2000, the year it came out. And we talked a little bit on tape about Dark Matter. And when we bring up the Hollywood question, Octavia says, "Well, Hollywood." And we all laughed and laughed. And actually, we do know Hollywood. And that's why none of those stories have been adapted to this day, But things are changing. Things are changing very rapidly. And the intersection between Afrofuturism and film and television is pretty staggering right now. So
someone just contacted me maybe 2 months ago looking, trying to get in touch with Derek Bell. And I said, "I'm sorry, sir, but he passed on."
Quite some time ago, actually.
For cosmic, he wanted the face, the cosmic slop.
And plus, Reggie Hudlin has already adapted Space Traders.
Space Traders with George posting it, with 2 other stories. But I was like, "Sir, he's gone. You have to reach out to his estate, So we've got a big splash, lots of Hollywood, questions and options and everything. But we waited and we waited and we didn't see it.
I'm telling you, it's as if it was no, and then all of a sudden, yes, to the point where the most beautiful experience I'm having right now is that there's so much interest in all kinds of Black speculative work, especially the horror space, that I can't do everything I hear about, right? So then I get to recommend other people's names and provide opportunities for people. And that is such a blessing. That's how a movement is sustaining. And I guess my question for you, based on your long view of history, and thank you so much for, as an archivist, just listing all these names, do you feel like we will be able to sustain better this time around than in the 90s? Is it possible for it all to roll back?
I think it is, because now we have even more independent presses and small presses, and there's a larger community, because remember, you're writing your books and I was writing mine, and the Black women's book clubs were, everywhere. They've been since the 1800s, right? Black women's clubs were always powerful institutions, social institutions for change, right? After emancipation and Reconstruction. So that's not new, but they were looking for certain kinds of stories, and sometimes they weren't as interested in science fiction and, initially, right? But then they start, spreading out, and they're like, "Oh, we love Octavia Butler," and hats off to the scholars who were, still teaching her work even when it was out of print, and there's a point when you could not buy her books in the country. You had to order them from abroad or whatever, but they were still being taught to new scholars coming up who kept that work alive. And they have done a great deal in, creating a demand for certain books and things like that. And I think that community of readers, they say that Black women are one of the demographics in this country that are the most well-read, and most well-educated, actually. That, along with having independent presses and small presses that are doing the work, right? And also a renewed awareness, because they keep going in and out of the awareness at the main the main houses,
Yes.
Yeah. Because you can still be there and not get all those books published because you don't own the house. You are a VP in the house, but you don't own the house. And now the Salesforce more than anything runs everything. And when I entered publishing, that wasn't the case. It was becoming the case, but that wasn't the case. Now they're physically in the room when books are being discussed for acquisitions. Before they would be in the conversation after it was acquired. And now they're in the room because everything is about that bottom line, that profit and loss statement.
And don't lose your advocate at the house. Don't lose your editor or your executive if it's film. Yeah.
Because there's no institutional memory and there's no rah-rah person for you.
Look at you.
So you need that. So it's not just about literary agents. It's about your editor being able to stay where they are and advocate for you inside that house and know who you are. I remember when I was doing Dark Matter, I had to turn over, back then we had Rolodexes. I had to turn over my entire Rolodex to Warner Books because Warner Aspect had never done, besides Nalo's first book, the contest book, right? Brown Girl in the Ring. They didn't have all the community that I had. I was fortunate to have really great publicists, Jonathan and Linda Duggins, who I think is still publicists.
So
I mean, we lucked out, but if I can just imagine you were somewhere else and they didn't have any of the connections that they had, or the fact that I had been in publishing and knew, all these things that needed to be done. So I think it's a chance because we have our own institutions and there are people who are a part of the institutions. I'm heading the magazine of fantasy and science fiction, so we are in the rooms and we're in the rooms. We can make those calls and make those decisions. So it's and also it's larger, it's global, it's connected. We are communicating with each other and people are using Afrofuturism as a tool to address the issues where they are. So there's community in South Africa. They're doing certain things. They're different from the people who are in Ghana. Nigeria has its own film and literary world that it's doing. UK, Birmingham has a community of Afrofuturists. Manchester, where Khadija George has been forever, or what had been, and now is in the US. I mean, it's just larger communities. Canada has a tremendous community, particularly with their visual artists, very strong with Cosmic. The North Side book that just came out from Quentin Versetti, just a lot of things. So if you're creating your own institutions, then you are the master of your destiny, at that point, and it's not always about waiting for that white gaze or that white lens to filter your work. So that when the pendulum swings back and that door closes, because, think about it. Depending on who's in the White House, television changes, right?
I so noticed that.
Absolutely. So, some people lose their jobs. They're no longer on the air. Certain shows are canceled, no matter how successful they were. Country music comes back out and they're like, everything's country music. It depends on who's in the office, which party is in power. And so we need to be able to have our own institutions live and be supported and survive so that our work is still being created and having a place to be distributed and celebrated and reviewed and discussed and taught, no matter what the larger mainstream.
That's right. Thank you for that. And I want to say, especially to the artists who are in this room watching this presentation, there has never been a better time to pursue your craft. I posted something on Twitter the other day about how good it felt to type the end. And some baby artists were saying, I can't wait to get to that point. I always give up after 10 or 15 pages. Listen, if you want to write books, if you want to write screenplays, start with short work, start with short stories. I just hooked a woman who wrote a short story up with a TV executive the other day. Right, because there has never been a better time. I've never been a more receptive publishing industry. You can publish it your damn self. You can shoot it your damn self on your phone. There's just never been a better time.
Well, and that's what I was thinking, how much technology plays a role in that, right? In the 90s, I keep trying to remind, my daughter, I didn't have the internet, right? iPad was something on Star Trek. It wasn't she's like, did your mom take away your iPad? And I kind of laugh to say, but since we do have internet, we do have print on demand, you do have a cell phone with a good camera on it, right? That in some ways, so many things are possible now that weren't, 20 or 30 years ago, that makes it the institution building, as you're talking about, more easier, and the communication across, right, the oceans and across countries. And, one of the questions we got as well, and I think it dovetails what we're talking about, and what we've been talking about, are what are the lessons that we get from Afrofuturism, right? We talk about how important it is and how historically we've had this imagination, right? This ability to imagine a different future, a better future, or the way it could all go downhill, right? But to use our imaginations. And we also know how much it is to struggle, right, with being creative in a pandemic. And so I'd love if you could share a bit of what you see, the lessons that Afrofuturism has had and does have, for times like these.
Well, the lessons for me, because I think each person is going to bring something different to that question, depending on who they are and where they are. For me, I've learned that there isn't a single Afrofuture, right? That there are many different visions of how we can be free and how we can strive and thrive in the future. But really what we're saying is we want to strive and thrive right now. So some of the work is looking towards utopian, solution oriented. I think of Pearl Clegg and the work that she's doing. It has these great covers that you think you're getting like your rare sister girlfriend book, right? And then you get in there and it's just like things that aren't happening, at least in your neighborhood, right? It's like really speculative, kind of futuristic ways of being of Black community trying to solve problems. So people don't feel safe coming home from work or walking home from school. Well, we have this group of people, these elders who will, who are like safety guards that help, people get home. And maybe that is happening in other places, but it's not like a overt common thing. And she's doing I think she's doing speculative work in her fiction, and sliding it in on us, in other ways. There isn't a spaceship on the cover, but it's very futuristic. So that's one lesson I learned, that Afrofuturism can be found in a lot of different settings that you might not realize, just like W.E. Du Bois's work. There it was, and there, other writers, Langston Hughes, has done some work at, Ask Your Mama, and some other things. And so we need to look for it in other ways because it's kind of a chameleon. And another thing is that it connects us to our past, because we always need to be aware of where we've come from so that we can see the patterns if we're going to return to that space again and figure out what solutions they use to survive. I remember watching Watchmen, and everyone, was talking about Tulsa because it was new news to some people. They weren't aware of that history. But to me, it's not even just Tulsa. It's happened in little places around the country. Every place where we were, that's where it happened. And it completely wiped out people in Wilmington, North Carolina, because they lost an election. So there's patterns of history that we can learn from to try to, make our present lives and our future lives brighter for us. And that's a great field for it. So it's a lot of different ways to approach it.
I like
I'm sorry.
Like Afrofuturism everywhere.
What I especially love about Afrofuturism, really all the speculative arts, because I don't tend to distinguish throughout the diaspora. I grant that Afrofuturism was coined as a term referring to African American writing and work, but in my head, Afrofuturism is all of us. But I do want to acknowledge, like you said, African Futurism, which is the term Nnedi Okorafor coined, is its own thing too. But I love how it encourages us to live simultaneously in the past, present, and future, right? Because all of the work is about the present. If we're writing about the future or writing about the past, we're always writing about the present. But those lessons from the past, like visually from Black Panther, yes, you have the spear and you have the telepathically operated flying contraption.
You got AI, right?
What do you call it? Oh my gosh, I'm gonna get fired from all the Marvel stuff because I can't bring all the names and the terminologies up to mind quickly. But yeah, it's like simultaneously we are tradition and we are futurism. All of that designed to steer us through what difficult moments. Let's face it. We are, while arts are thriving, the social realm, the economic realm, the political realm still, there are no instant miracles in 2021. It's also the most difficult time a lot of us have faced personally, even while the art is thriving, which is an interesting headspace. Mm-hmm. And I'm wondering how you navigate that. Sheree, let's talk about the pandemic. How has it affected you? How do you keep your balance between, oh my God, we're going to die, and what a time to be alive?
It's been last year was a very strange year because I spent it with I call it a low-grade fever of rage a lot of the time. I had to the point where I had to turn the news off and kind of check out of it sometimes just to be able to take care of myself, because just watching the willful negligence, and especially when it amplified when they realized, oh, this community is being affected by COVID more. So guess what? Everyone go back to the economy. Before they were sitting out, staring out their windows and peeping and afraid. And then they were like, oh, only Black people are dying from it, or only elders are dying from it. Oh, well, they're disposable. They're, disposable people. Mm-hmm. They'll all go back. The rest of us can go back and keep spreading it. And it's just infuriating watching this foolishness, because you want to talk about Octavia tried. She told us about this already in Parable of the Sower. She told us about this in Parable of the Talents, which I was fortunate enough to be able to review for the Washington Post book world. So you see that quote on that book, that's from me, from the Washington Post. But she told us this because she was watching the Republican Party and the Democrats, because it's not just a single party thing, right? It's an investment in a status quo,
right? Political narrative. Power structure,
yes, it's a political structure that has a lot of allies across the aisle in terms of why they keep certain things the same. She was discussing all that work. Then people thought it was, she was, predicting the future. No, she was observing her present. She was observing the great, Make America Great Again came from Bill Clinton. She was looking at world of her, the wall communities in Southern California where she was, and thinking about how this could play out, which is what speculative fiction does. So for me, sitting up in the pandemic, I was very, like the rest of the world, very worried and unhappy. And that, coupled with the continuous assaults that we have in terms of the way justice is unequally applied to our communities, the way Black children are never treated as children, the way they are brutalized, our bodies are brutalized. It is a horror story. I go to Morrison, who cautioned, us to really look at who actually has that psychological issue, because it's not us. We are always happy to be free and to be a part of the American project if we can actually get full citizenship and have it honored in private and the political realm, have it honored consistently. And that's just been a problem that has plagued us for so many years. So watching that, then I also was still having to be very creative, because as Tananarive said earlier in the conversation, everyone was like, do you have a project? Do you have a project? Because, when we start setting fire to things, then change happens. And I don't think people are aware of that. You look at Watts, you look at when the Johnson signed the Voting Rights Act, it wasn't because Dr. King, they had already murdered Dr. King and he hadn't signed it. Our most respectable, honorable, nonviolent person had been murdered in my hometown. I'm literally 2 blocks away from the National Civil Rights Museum. I could walk there. I'm 1 block away from the 1866 massacre site, where they just ran through the streets of Memphis, burning and killing for 3 days because they were upset about economic competition from the newly freed bunch of men and women. So that wasn't what made them sign it. What made them sign it is that people like my parents' age and above were in the streets enraged, and they started protesting, not necessarily non-violently. They were burning up stuff all across the country. And that's when Johnson signed the voting rights legislation. So I go back and speed up until to what was happening in Minnesota. And the conversation changed in publishing like that. Suddenly, do you have a book? Do you have a book? Do you have it? We would like that. Remember that project you came to us about 2 years ago?
Girl, I wish I could talk about it. I mean, the same thing in TV, and film. Projects that you had pitched a year ago. And all of a sudden now.
So now, so it's so I felt a type of way about that. I'm like, yay, it's the most amazing things are happening. But also, really? While some of the systemic stuff hasn't really changed, the kind of weird predatory relationship they have to writers and everything, because you get all the work before and then they take 10,000 years to pay you, or you're doing all the things. It's like all that kind of stuff. But so that was my experience in the pandemic. But I think about what Octavia tried to tell us about it, because honestly, she spent a lot of her adult life impoverished. And I don't know if people realize that.
Absolutely.
Octavia Butler spent a lot of her adult life struggling to make her ends meet, having to place her typewriter in the pawn shop and hoping to get $15.
She was Dana in Kindred, working those odd jobs.
She wrote from her actual life, but she had a vision for herself. She had a dream for herself, and she worked every day to make it, to manifest it, to make it real, even when all the things around her weren't always in her favor. And to me, I think about that. I think about what she would have, what conversations she would have to tell us about us going into 2016, going into, last year, going into this inauguration. I'm curious about the work that she would have created. How she would have, once she finished, having her victory tour from Fledgling, because she said that was her fun book. And I was like, that's your fun book?
That's fun.
The questions I explore in that are a little easier to answer than the ones that I'm, working on, for the third novel that she was trying to work on. And, and I miss her. I miss her not be able to see this other generation of people discover her work and love it so much. Seeing the opera that Toshi Reagan created, Parable, and the wonderful performances that came out of that. Seeing the work that the Wild Sea Collective and the Octavia Emergent Strategies group have done in the Sisters in Philadelphia, and just all these people who have taken her art. And it is it's very inspiring for them, and they've created other art and also real-time work that benefits actual living people, not people just in the future, but people right now. And that comes out of the tough questions that she was asking in her novels. It comes from her telling us that God is change, and just all that beautiful poetry. Her Earth Seeds has planted good fruit, I think. And so I try to hold on to that in art. And if it wasn't for art, if it wasn't for the movies, if it wasn't for the books I read, if it wasn't for the music I listened to, I would have had a much different experience of the quarantine, of those first 6 months of the pandemic. It would have been a nightmare without art. And I hope that, if anything, besides an actual health system for the nation that works, and income equality, and actual broadband for everyone, and access to the internet. The questions that we were asking in the 90s, the digital divide. Well, we're still a digital divide.
Well, and then you have Alondra Nelson.
Yeah, it's still a digital divide, right?
Yes.
We had TVs then, but it was still a digital divide, right?
Right.
The technology isn't some of the consumer stuff doesn't represent actually the large gaps that we have in terms of our culture. The fact that we're having a conversation about $15 an hour for wage workers, when very well you're not even going to get 40 hours. You know, right? Make sure you don't get. They have algorithms to make sure, especially in retail, that you don't want to get those 40 hours, except the managers. And that's not enough to take care of one person in one place, let alone, maybe if you're in Uckabuck somewhere, Tennessee, where, but they're going to help you in New York. It's not going to help you in Chicago. They're going to help you in Detroit. It's not going to help you, in places where we are in large numbers. So 15, it should be 22, 25. But, that's a whole nother thing. But I think about that and realize that those are the kinds of questions that she was asking in her larger work and giving us models of collaboration and the type of work. I feel like Stacey Abrams is a character in a Octavia Butler, novel, because she survived and she saw a way, and she didn't just sit down after her campaign for governor.
Oh, she certainly did not.
She said, "You got the wrong one." No, she said, "You got the right ones, baby." You got the right one, and she got to work quietly doing her work. So,
I know we have to wrap up, but I want to ask one last question based on something you said earlier. You said you were exposed to Octavia Butler's writing in college when someone taught Kindred. What would you recommend as, the gateway book or the gateway story? What would be what's that one thing you're going to read that's going to put you down the rabbit hole of Black speculative fiction that you would recommend people teach or expose others to? If you could pick, I don't want to pick one, but if you could, I'd love to know.
You know what? For me, it was Wild Seed. I liked Kindred, but Kindred made me mad. I was mad at that book, right? But Wild Seed got my spirit, got me in my feelings. Like I was like, what's happening? I had a lot more conversations about Wild Seed. So I feel like if you are into more I feel like the character was more fully developed in Wild Seed. So that would be great. If you were like an ideal concept person, then you would like the fantasy novel Kindred. And she did consider that her fantasy novel. Because she said she didn't spend any energy on exploring the mechanism for time travel. So for her, it is magic. It's fantasy. And then also, of course, speech sounds. Yeah. Now, I wouldn't recommend Fledgling as their entry level. That's a little advanced.
That is the one I often just say, if I could have one conversation with Octavia about her past work. That's the one I had questions about some of the decisions in the book that make it difficult, for some of my students. It's, I'm not going to get too into it, but you know what I mean.
I thought it was fun. I mean, but
oh, it's kind of creepy.
Until you start picturing what's happening in the story in your head, then it's like problematic.
We'll have to do one just on Fledgling.
Yes.
I want people to know where to find you. So you can find Sheree Renée Thomas here.com.
Please do check out this website. We didn't even really talk that much about Sheree's work. We're so busy talking about everybody else's work, Sheree, but you have a beautiful body of work on your own. And I'm
Can we grab a second or two? I would love to. Yeah, hold on. Let me stop this. Yes. Tell us about. And even people have asked about audio.
Bar Blues. Is there an audio book? What's the skinny?
This is my first all fiction collection because I'm a hybrid as Lucille Clifton. I'm a two-headed woman. I have two crowns, poetry and fiction. So most of my other collections were a combination of fiction and poetry. But this is the first one that's all fiction. It's from Third Man Books. Woo-hoo, and it's in its second printing.
Nice.
So go out and get it. It's up for awards, so you can nominate it or vote for it on the Locust Awards and Nebula and Hugo's. And I have a few novelettes in it. It's a time traveling jubilee story or emancipation story. How do we get free? What does that look like? It's some Black horror in that. I love music, so the thread through it is Black music through times. So there's some stories they're infused with house music, hip hop, whatever. Some has blues in it. some of it has funk and soul, if you're going to look at it that way. And I've got an immortal DJ, and I've got her and her sisters doing different stuff. I've got some beat girl dance group in Harlem that gets caught up in some bad technology. I've got some old kaiju stories, because I grew up watching Ultraman and Godzilla. So
Hey.
So it's all kinds of stuff. I got a failed utopian, black utopian that didn't work out. So what does that look like? When we reinscribe some of the same things that we're trying to get away from. So it's lots of different short stories in there, a few novelettes, and I just had a great time with these works. African vampires, like all kinds of stuff.
Good for you. I mean, amazing. So be sure to check that out. 9 Bar Blues, and her website is www.shereereneethomas.com. In the chat, but it's easy to remember because it's just her name.
Yeah. I'm going to ask you to share about our other workshop. We've had so much fun doing this that we realized we had to get community.
Yes, some of you are already a part of our community, but yeah, after we started these free Octavia Tried to Tell Us webinars, we realized we wanted to have more time, more intimate time to chat, to invite participants to tell us their stories and their experiences, to share writing prompts with participants. So we have a workshop called Saving Ourselves, Shaping Change Workshop, where we talk about the 7 steps of Octavia's method of shaping change as we've interpreted them through her work. Not that she set them out, we interpreted them. Ongoing discussion of her work and influence, the Shaping Change e-journal with monthly writing prompts, more interaction with us, a social media page where people are posting quite a bit. And as a sign-up bonus, when you join this community it's a small monthly fee, your sign-up bonus is that recording I mentioned from 2000 that my husband Stephen Barnes and I did with Octavia Butler, where she did talk about dark matter, and we all laughed about how slow Hollywood is. and my favorite thing about that interview is how much she did laugh. So when you read her work, you don't hear her laughing very often, but in that interview, she was letting loose a little bit. So you can register for Saving Ourselves, the Shaping Change Workshop, at www.octaviawebinar.com. Check out our video, learn more about it, www.octaviawebinar.com. And we'll have these, you'll see it in the chat, and we'll put it in the notes of the replay, but we are also working on an app. So if you are a developer for Octavia Tribe, so it's easy to find us in archives, and other people, link to all other people doing very cool Octavia work. And we'd love to have an app designer who actually knows and loves this field as well. So there's a link there so you can share your information with us. We'll probably be working on this very soon. So probably by the end of this month, we'll be looking at everything. So please, you can click it in if you're here live, and I'll make sure there's links for the replay as well. We'd love to hear from you as well. Absolutely. And we thank you for being here with us and giving us part of your afternoon, your Valentine's Day weekend, or shall I say, overpriced chocolate and red clothing.
Thank you so much. Thank you. It was a pleasure. It's always great to remember Octavia Butler. I just wish she was here. I feel like she is, observing and joyful about all the wonderful things that are coming out now and will in the future. So keep writing, everyone.
Thank you for your tremendously generous spirit of sharing and being the griot, in terms of Afrofuturism around the world, the Black speculative arts, and your own wonderful work. And yeah, just thank you so much. Have a great weekend.
Have a great weekend, everyone.
Bye. Thank you. Hey.